Good morning. Welcome to this first webinar in ORN's training series for 2021 and 2022. My name is Elizabeth Rogers and I work for Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland, and we are the ORN Secretariat team. So the theme of today's webinar is tackling the problem of litter. And as we've seen, with more and more people embracing the outdoors during COVID-19, there is a growing litter problem. Over the weekend, I took my nieces to the Silent Valley. So that's the picture on the left-hand side. And it's a very iconic landscape in the Mourne Mountains in County Down in Northern Ireland. But the picture on the right was how I found it. And I think that image with my little niece on the left-hand side kind of epitomises the litter epidemic that we are seeing across the UK and Ireland. Now, of course, litter is a problem, but with the summer season ahead and the anticipation of huge visitor pressures, this webinar aims to explore new and old approaches to keep our environment clean. So just to kind of take you briefly through some housekeeping rules for today's events. So we're asking all our attendees to turn off your webcam and to turn off your microphones, and that's just to help with bandwidth so that all of us can have hopefully a seamless broadcast. It should be noted that this webinar is being recorded, so if you don't wish to be seen on the webinar or during the breakout rooms, just keep your camera off during all times. I would encourage all of you to use the chat pane, so you can open the little chat icon, and that's a great place to input comments and questions to speakers. And today, as you will see in the next slide, we really have a stacked agenda. So really that is the place to input questions and engage with speakers. So just in terms of the running order for today, our first two presentations are more focused looking at the policy and the strategy and the research side of things. And perhaps if there's time after the first two presentations from Pippa and Lizzie, there should be time for Q&A. And then our three presentations after that will focus more on the ground approaches. So you can see there's lots to get through. So those presentations should take us up to 12 o'clock, and then between 12 and 12:25, we're hoping to have breakout rooms, and that's really a place for you to share your own ideas and to bring examples of maybe new and innovative approaches in terms of what is working and not working in terms of tackling litter. So that's the place to engage. I would encourage you to turn off your webcams then and to really engage in rich discussion. And then what we hope to do then finally is to have a strong wrap-up session. And what I'm aiming for is for each breakout room to bring or to propose one action that we could get behind. We'll have a quick vote on that, and then that should hopefully give us our agreed action for the way forward. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over quickly to Pippa Harper. Pippa, if you want to share your webcam and unmute yourself. Pippa Harper is Policy Advisor for DEFRA. And I'm just going to pass over to you now, Pippa, to lead.
Hi everybody, thank you very much to the network for inviting me here. I'm just going to share my slides, and I'm going to switch off my camera so I don't get distracted by the miniature me in the corner of my screen. So I work in the local environmental quality team at DEFRA. For those of you who aren't familiar, local environmental quality, we deal predominantly with litter and litter and fly tipping, but we also address issues like graffiti, abandoned shopping trolleys, dog fouling, all of those very familiar nuisances. And yes, I work for DEFRA, and obviously we work in partnership with all of our kind of arm's length bodies, including Natural England, who invited me here to speak today. So I'm just going to run through our litter strategy for England, which you may or may not be familiar with, but try and focus on kind of what's coming up as well as what we have done. So the litter strategy for England was published in 2017, and it was the first strategy of its kind. It was developed with the help of an advisory group and is a government strategy, so covers all departments. The main aims for the strategy were to sort of take a three-tiered approach, focusing on education, enforcement and infrastructure to deliver a reduction in litter, and very importantly to create a culture where it's totally unacceptable to drop litter. I'm sure we would all agree on the call that it is completely unacceptable to drop litter. There is some evidence supporting sort of accidental littering, so wind-blown littering, scavenging, etc. And those are things that we do look at. But we also try and focus on kind of behaviour change interventions to promote prevention rather than clean up where possible. Following the litter strategy, we published the resources and waste strategy, which is a much wider government strategy for how we really approach our resources and how we deal with them when they become waste. And really, you'll all be familiar with reduce, reuse and recycle. But yeah, we want to promote that circular economy. And of course, the less sort of disposable single-use material that is available out there, the less we expect to see littered. So we want to really prevent litter from happening in the first place by taking this approach. So you might have seen some things like single-use plastic items being banned in certain areas. So plastic straws and stirrers. We've also increased the single-use carrier bag charge very recently to 10p and extended it to all retailers. And we can actually show that that's having an effect on littering as well as on kind of plastic use, because now in our kind of latest litter surveys, which Keep Britain Tidy are very involved with, we no longer see single-use carrier bags as a commonly littered item, whereas before that policy was brought in, they were being seen more prevalently in the countryside. So that's just sort of an example of how our wider approach will also kind of affect littering. So coming back to the three pillars, so education, enforcement and infrastructure, I'm just going to run through a few things that we have done on each of these. And bear with me because my slides are showing up very, very small at my end. So on education, we want to send a clear message, engage with local communities and make a compelling business case. So we started off by looking at our approach to data and developed the litter dashboard, which I can explain a little bit more on the next slide, but really kind of highlights how complex it is to kind of gather data. And I think Lizzie might be talking a little bit more about research later on. We also launched the Anti-Littering Campaign, which is run by Keep Britain Tidy and which we continue to support. And most recently, we've launched campaigns called Respect the Outdoors and supported Keep Britain Tidy's Love Parks campaign. And obviously, we do a lot of social media messaging, and we're really trying to link litter messaging within the communications that the department puts out. So, for example, when the Countryside Code was just updated, I'm sure you're familiar with, we worked with that department to make sure that messaging on litter was kind of incorporated within that. We see litter as very much affecting all different parts of our country, urban and countryside. So we try and kind of embed our messaging where we can. We've also done kind of various funds on innovation and support the Great British Spring Clean. And I'll come on to in a little bit how we've been working with producers to tackle packaging particularly. So these are the metrics that we use to show to kind of show the state of litter in England at the moment. So we kind of break it down into various different metrics, which then affect how we develop our policy going forward. So obviously we look at commonly littered items, and you might have seen that cigarette butts are the most prevalent type of litter. And so the government's just announced that they're exploring regulatory options to tackle this particular type of litter, because it's such a big issue, and of course because it's toxic. Packaging as well, as a commonly littered item, we're really focusing our attentions there. And one metric that we do like to see going up, of course, is the number of volunteers. And this is a few years old now. So we've really seen almost a tidal wave in volunteering over the last couple of years, which is really, really encouraging to see. And it just goes to show how important this is to sort of the general public, and why government want to take action. So the next pillar is improving enforcement, and this may not be so relevant to those of you on the call, but we want to. We have increased the fixed penalty notices for littering in the last few years, up to £150 as a maximum, and extended powers so that you can now, if someone litters from your vehicle, you as the keeper of the vehicle might be can be held accountable for that action. And we've also published guidance for authorised officers on the use of those powers, and we are looking to take powers through the Environment Bill to kind of place that guidance on a statutory footing and place conditions on authorised officers to sort of professionalise that arm of enforcement, and also to kind of try and promote a consistent approach across the country. We know certain local authorities are really, really engaged and kind of fully using their enforcement powers, and others may not be able to for various reasons. So we want to kind of level the playing field a little bit, and make sure that a consistent approach is being taken. And then the third pillar is infrastructure. So we use a fun word, binfrastructure, and we've just published our binfrastructure guidance. And we also made a fund available alongside that to help local authorities to implement the guidance. So we've just supported, I think, 44 local authorities to the tune of about £1 million to kind of improve their bin provision and sort of make it more efficient, I suppose. We also invested just under £10 million in 2019 into the Community Cleanup Fund, which was led by the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government. But their report shows us that a lot of local authorities use that money to purchase equipment, which now is being used by volunteers, and making it really easy for those volunteers to tackle litter in their local areas. So we're really, really pleased to see that's continuing to deliver locally. Just a slide on infrastructure and what it covers. So we've sort of, the infrastructure guidance tackles all of these things, and they're all very important things to consider. So it's not just a case of putting a bin in. You have to be able to maintain it. You have to be able to empty it regularly. You need to have the right bin in the right place for different local environments. So a coastal region might have very different needs to a town centre, for example. And we, through the Litter Innovation Fund, we saw some really interesting trials on like seagull-proof bins and those sorts of things, which are highlighted within this guidance as well. So I've got a slide on coming up, but I've come to the end of my time. So just to run through some things to look out for, the Environment Bill is coming back to Parliament. Like I said, we've got those measures to do with to do with littering enforcement, but we're also seeking powers to introduce extended producer responsibility schemes and also deposit return schemes for drinks containers. We are publishing this year a roadside litter report following engagement with over 100 local authorities and a survey of roadside litter. And of course, a plug for the Great British Spring Clean, which I'm sure you're all getting involved with. But our ministers are also looking forward to taking part in their local communities as well. So yes, I've just put a slide as well if anyone does want to get in touch with us. These are the 2 email addresses to get a hold of our team for litter related or fly tipping related matters. And that's all from me. I'll hand over to Lizzie or back to Liz.
Yes, back to Liz here. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
That was super, and I love the term infrastructure.
Yes, thank you.
And also, it's great to see on the dashboard that volunteering is on the rise. So that seems to be positive in terms of maybe where people's mentality is. So if you have any questions for Pippa, pop them into the chat pane, and hopefully after our next presentation, we'll have a bit of a quick time for Q&A. So I'm going to hand over now to Lizzie Kenyon. It's great to have Lizzie with us. She comes from Keep Britain Tidy, so it flows on quite nicely from our last presentation. And Lizzie is the director for the Centre for Social Innovation, and she's got lots of insights to share with us this morning. So I'll hand over to you, Lizzie.
So thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this morning's event. As Elizabeth said, I'm Lizzie and I'm Director of Keep Britain Tidy's Centre for Social Innovation. For those of you that aren't familiar with our organisation, we are an independent environmental charity. We're quite well known for our litter work, but in fact we have 3 quite broad aims around the environment. So those are the eradication of litter and waste, the improvement of quality of public space, and helping people to live more sustainably. And we do this in a whole host of ways that you can see outlined in our approach here. But a few things you might not know about Keep Britain Tidy. We run the Green Flag Award for parks and also the Blue Flag Award for beaches, with which you might be familiar. And the Great British Spring Clean's obviously already had a call out for this morning, which is great. That's one of our major campaigns that we run each year, and one of the largest mobilisations of volunteers across the country to get engaged in cleaning up our environments. We also run the Eco Schools programme in England, which is one of the largest educational programmes around the environment in the world, and engages children and young people in taking action for the environment and change within their own schools. So a whole host of different programmes that we run, of which those are just a few, but much of our work really is centred on working with other organisations and supporting other organisations like yourselves to tackle the issues that we're all mutually interested in. My area of focus in terms of our approach is research and innovation, and we carry out research within my team to inform the work of the charity across our 3 aims. One of the areas that we're particularly specialist in is conducting behavioural research. So my team really focuses on getting underneath the skin of why people behave in the ways that they do, and how we can encourage some of the right behaviours and discourage some of the wrong behaviours, or the behaviours that are causing issues in relation to our agenda. So those are insights about why people litter, why people fly tip, why people put things in the wrong bins, or produce too much waste. And the reason that we take this research-led approach is that this approach really helps us move beyond assumptions about why people do things, and to gain firm evidence about what's really going on. And sometimes through our research, and you'll see this in some of the insights I present today, we confirm things that we already thought that we knew. But more often than not, we find out something completely unexpected about what what's going on in people's minds when they engage in some of the behaviours we would like to change. And that's because as humans, our behaviours are influenced by all sorts of different things. They're influenced by where we are, who we're with, what we see in the world around us, both in terms of what others are doing, but also in terms of environmental cues. And this is really very much the same when it comes to littering. There are, of course, and I'm sure you'll have experienced, these individuals are very hardened, few who might flagrantly litter, but actually when it comes to littering behaviour for the rest of the population, the behaviour is a bit more nuanced. So in terms of our approach, we're really interested in sharing those insights together with organisations like yourself, and that's what I'm going to be doing this morning, is sharing some of those insights. But in terms of our wider approach, we also take insights and turn them into practical new approaches to tackle particular problem behaviours, to gather evidence about what works, and I'll be referencing a few examples of that through my presentation. And that's really about us gathering evidence about new approaches that can be scaled up for broader impact, so that everyone can benefit from that evidence base. So today I'll share with you some insights that we've gathered through our extensive work on litter over many years, but I'm going to draw on a couple of very recent research projects, literally carried out in the past few weeks and months, one of which is a nationally representative survey that we've conducted through Ipsos Mori, so nationally representative of UK adults, and then a really exciting piece of research we're pleased to have conducted with the Friends of the Lake District, which was exploring littering behaviour and antisocial behaviour. And that really followed some of the quite extraordinary sights we saw on the easing of lockdown last year. And through this, we've spoken directly with litterers, admitted litterers, and that's really core to our approach, is speaking directly to the people that engage in the behaviours we're interested in changing. So what you'll hear today is insights sort of directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak. In addition to sharing insights, I'm hopefully going to give you some practical suggestions of how we can apply those insights to our approaches and our own efforts in tackling littering. I just wanted to share with you some of the headlines from the Ipsos Mori about what the great British public are planning to do this summer. So hopefully what you can see on this slide here is that we've got lots and lots of people planning to go out and take advantage of the great outdoors, which is obviously brilliant to see. And I'm sure you've been very aware over the last 12 months in this increase in interest from the public in using our outdoor spaces. But I'm sure you're also aware, and that's why you've come to a session like this morning, that there are going to be challenges that this sort of volume of visits is likely to pose. What we can see here is that there is a really significant proportion of the population who are planning to go to parks and beaches that they've been to before. So that's 67% for parks and 51% for beaches. And that's, as I say, the UK adult population, so very large numbers. And interestingly, quite a lot of people who are going to be visiting somewhere they've not been to before. Not entirely surprisingly, though perhaps still interesting, we've got really large chunks of the population here planning to have a picnic, and perhaps weather withstanding, but also 23% of the adult population reporting that they're planning to have a barbecue in a park or beach this summer. That's obviously a really significant number of people and a lot of barbecuing, and of course we know that picnics and barbecues pose their own littering challenges, and that's certainly something we need to be thinking about as we try and get ahead of some of these issues in the coming months. I thought I would just touch on some general things that we know about littering behaviour from our previous research. So the first thing to note is that littering is really heavily influenced by the location and the context within which the behaviour is happening, and quite often by the item itself which is being littered. So that could be that the item is dirty or smelly, whether it's containerised, so if it's neat and tidy, that can actually influence people to litter an item. Or in the case of barbecues or cigarette stubs, you know, the fact that the item could be a potential hazard. So all of these things are having an influence on littering behaviour. And we can also say that certain littering behaviours are viewed as more acceptable than others, and I'll touch on some of that in the next slides. What we've found through our work is that often people who would never ever consider themselves illiterate will have littered in certain circumstances, and they may not have even thought of that act as littering. The very good example of this is smoking related litter. Cigarette butts are generally not perceived as litter in the same way as other items, so you might get smokers who would never litter anything else but who would drop a cigarette butt. And in terms of our approaches to tackling litter, we need to really think, therefore, about addressing these specific triggers and barriers to littering, rather than simply telling people not to litter, because we know that, you know, as I've said, some people aren't even considering the particular acts of littering as littering, so they're not engaging with those types of messages. Okay, so if we move on. So through the Ipsos Mori survey that we conducted, we asked the public about what circumstances they thought it would be okay to leave rubbish behind in a public place. And positively, 77% of the population thought it was never acceptable to leave rubbish behind in any situation. However, there were certain circumstances in which that acceptability crept up. And the most common situations that people felt it would be acceptable were in the location where food and drink had been bought. So we've definitely seen this insight through other research we've done around beach littering behaviour, where people thought it was more acceptable to leave waste behind if they bought those items in the location. That's obviously quite an unexpected finding, but an interesting one. And this is closely followed, the same percentage of people, 6%, thought if available bins were full, that was an acceptable situation in which to leave behind waste. That's closely followed by the items being smelly or dirty, or indeed if they were a disposable barbecue, or the items were tied up, and they were all at 5%. So they sound like small percentages, but when we talk about the overall population, these are really big numbers. Interestingly, we had slightly higher acceptability amongst men than women for leaving waste in certain circumstances, and overall younger age groups, so the 16 to 24s and the 25 to 34s, were more likely to say it was acceptable in certain circumstances to leave rubbish behind. So next slide, please. So what can we do with this? Well, one of the things we can do, and obviously Pippa's referenced bin infrastructure, but rather than necessarily just putting in more bins, which we know is economically not always viable and not necessarily what we want to see anyway, we can do a job around highlighting when and where bins are available to people. And we often see really lovely bins that really blend into the environment, but actually thinking about how can we better highlight to people where bins are so that they're very salient. We can also think about messages which encourage people to take waste home, but again, that are presented in a really attractive and easy to see way. There's some great take your rubbish home messages in my local park, but they're in green on green bins, so they actually really fade into the background. So you can see here an example of an intervention we tested on beaches, which was around binning rubbish or taking it home, and that was really successful. On one beach we had littering reductions of 59%, and that was accompanied with a wildlife impacts message. So it was all about the fact that rubbish could get into the environment and hurt wildlife. In terms of this insight around businesses and these cafes or locations where food is purchased, there's an opportunity, we think, for engaging those businesses to set expectations with customers, perhaps at the point of sale, about the fact that waste needs to be disposed of correctly, and it's not okay just to leave it behind because you've purchased it there. And there's a job, I think, to do with some more rural settings about how we get people to plan in advance for dealing with their rubbish when out and about, and I'll touch on that briefly in a moment. If you could move on for me. We wanted to just share with you some of the insights from the Lake District work, which were surprising to us. So in the Lake District, we spoke to visitors that had come over the last 12 months. And one of the things that was really quite surprising was that 52% of visitors to the Lake District expected to be able to find a public litter bin when they needed one. And we were not expecting that to be so high, particularly in this type of setting. And when we drilled down to the group of litterers within that sample, that was about the same 54% of litterers, so quite unexpected. We asked people about the concept of leaving no trace, and you can see here that 1 in 5 visitors just didn't believe that that was possible. So this case of people feeling sort of overwhelmed with rubbish and not really knowing how it's possible to go on a walk and not leave waste behind. And when we drilled down into the littering group, that was 40% of litterers. So people are just thinking that that's not possible. So an obvious thing for us to look at in terms of addressing that perception. And I'm sure you'll have experience of people talking about this, but we had 1 in 10 visitors to the Lake District thinking that there was someone who was going to come and pick litter up after them, and within the littering group that rose to 33%. So if you could move the slide on for me. So in terms of how we can address these things, we think particularly for the more remote type of settings, these more natural settings where there really isn't going to be significant bin provision, that we need to address this idea that there's going to be bins available, to you wherever you are, whenever you might need one. That's going to be really important. When we're thinking about this leave no trace idea, and that people just can't even get their heads around how that was possible, there could be an opportunity for us to use social norming approaches. So this is where we show that the majority of people are doing one behaviour, and that it's the minority of people who aren't engaging. And you can see an example here on the slide of us using this for dog fouling. So here we showed the number of people that were being responsible and cleaning up after their dog in a particular park setting, and the number of people who weren't, to show that the vast majority of people were doing the right thing. And of course, we're social creatures, we like to follow the crowd, so these can be really effective. And in this instance, we had a 38% reduction in dog fouling incidents. And again, I think we need, through all our work, to address this idea that there's people sort of out there just picking waste up for you wherever you are. So that could be about highlighting that there's very small amount of resource dedicated to that, or that resource could otherwise be spent on something else. Next slide, please. And I promise I'll whistle through these last 2 for time. Last 2 or 3. A really interesting insight, again, from the Lake District work, which I just wanted to reflect on because it came as such a surprise to us, was there was an assumption when we went into the work that it was new visitors coming to the Lake District that were causing the litter problem. In fact, what we found was the opposite. So 17% of first-time visitors had admitted to littering at the Lake District, and we found that actually rose, depending on how many times you'd been, up to 39% for those that had visited many times. So really suggesting that this instances of littering are increasing with frequency of visiting. And to address that, we can think about how we make our messages stand out to regular visitors, because what we need to do is disrupt these what are becoming habitual behaviours. So thinking about how we can make messages around littering appear novel, new and relevant to these regular visitors. Next slide, please. So very quickly, to end on a bit of a positive about drivers for correct behaviours, through the Ipsos Mori study, we asked people about what they were concerned about and what the impacts of waste could be. And the 2 top, although there was high concern across all of the things that we discussed with people, the top 2 really were around that litter could cause harm to others, that it could be dangerous to others, and that it could cause harm to wildlife. So 2 key drivers for the right behaviours. Next slide, please. So what we can do with this is we can think about highlighting those potential impacts through our messaging, and you can see here an example of where we've done that. Use that wildlife approach again for a roadside littering campaign we ran, and this used reflective materials, so it really showed up when people were driving past, and it highlighted the fact that small mammals can get inside bottles and cans and die, and that's based on research insight. And that was really successful. We had a 26% reduction in roadside vehicle littering, and actually for cans and bottles that rose up to a 34% reduction. So really, in terms of those target materials, very effective. We can also think just about highlighting the broader impacts of littering to the community, to the environment, and we would recommend using, where possible, hyperlocal messaging, so really drilling down to the particular place where the problem is happening and the particular impacts on a very specific community. And we can also think about utilising the messenger effect, so that is that's an insight around the fact that we're more responsive to messages, well, more or less responsive to messages depending on who they come from. So generally speaking, we're more receptive to messages from individuals rather than institutions. So we can think about using, you know, our volunteers, children, real workers in our messaging to help people understand the impacts of their behaviour. So just last slide from me. Hopefully that's given you just a few ideas about what's going on in your own settings and some food for thought in terms of ways you might go about tackling the issues. And I'm sure there's some practical examples going to be shared later. You can see on this slide just some reports that we've got coming up to look out for, and of course the Great British Spring Clean, which launches this week, and it would be great to see you signed up for. And I'll stop talking. Thanks, Elizabeth.
No, thank you very much, Lizzie. You cope very well. It just shows you that with online events, there's always technical hiccups, no matter how we're doing these. So that was really fabulous, and I think it really does illustrate the importance of research and making sure that our interventions are evidence-based. And I know that there's assumptions that I had previously that have been completely, you know, corrected because of the research that's just been shared there. So thank you. There's lots of conversations happening in the chat pane, which is great to see. So maybe Lizzie, if you want to jump into the chat pane, because we're just going to move on to our next presentation, but there you'll find some questions, and as well for Pippa Harper, there's some questions for you in there too that you can engage with. So yes, I think that's the place today to be putting questions to speakers just because of our stacked schedule. So I'm going to pass over now to Jonathan. Jonathan, if you want to share your webcam and unmute your microphone. Jonathan is one of our executive members, and he is Strategic Manager for Countryside Access and Wellbeing for Hampshire County Council. So he's going to bring the local authority perspective. Over to you, Jonathan.
Morning, everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run you through a local authority perspective. And what I'll try and do is just pick up on a little bit of an outline of what Hampshire Countryside Service is, talk about COVID, talk about litter management and dog fouling particularly. So in context, Hampshire County Council is one of the biggest local authority countryside services in the country. Sometimes that's great, sometimes that's bad. We've got quite a number of smaller sites across the county, somewhere in the region of 80 in total. And then we also have 7 major country parks. The white areas, which are down, we have the coast, we're running along our coastline. Portsmouth and Southampton are whited out on this, so Royal Victoria Country Park isn't in the Solent there. It's actually on the edge of Southampton. So what you'll also see on there is that we've got 11 district councils. We also have 2 national parks and 4 AONBs that cross this area. Bulk of our population is along the Solent, and that's where we've got quite a lot of our major facilities. So COVID, throughout COVID, local authorities and park operators have seen an increase in visitors, but also a rapid increase in antisocial behaviour and littering. The picture, the image on your screen there is of a poster which we developed and shared across our local district councils so they could put their own logos on. So we had a common message going across Hampshire. There was obviously the original one, which was produced in New Zealand, I think, which was "Don't Be a Tosser," which was very popular and actually used across the country in different places. We're Hampshire, so we didn't. Yeah, so read what you like into that. We've seen a massive growth in visits to our countryside sites and access routes. that's a really good thing, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. It's a really, really positive message. But that came at a time when we couldn't really engage in the way that we'd like to engage. And because of travelling restrictions, a lot of our bigger parks had very different views of using them. And a lot of our smaller parks got rapid increase in visitor numbers. That alongside reduced volunteers during that period basically resulted in quite a lot of littering issues. But on a positive, again, it's come at a time when national media interest in green space and the impact of litter was headline news. So again, some positives have to be taken from that. And in turn, climate change and sort of the impact of climate change has risen dramatically. And that has to be taken into account alongside things like coastal littering and the opportunity that we have by combining messages. So during COVID, we, as many other councils did some research. This research was done right at the beginning in May, just as we were sort of reopening towards the end of the first lockdown. And I think there's two key things here I want to point out, one of which, well, the above circled in red, but essentially mean that people will be come to the countryside more, and they see it as a place where they will explore more post-COVID, but also that there's been a displacement between people who would have traditionally gone to a country park, and now they're going to be using more local spaces more often. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but our work and the way that we manage our sites probably needs to adapt. Okay, so litter. Our country parks saw a really big increase in litter. I think the more people, more litter is something which we have to understand. It does happen, particularly different types of litter. We've seen masks, we've seen gloves, we've seen a rapid increase in nitrous oxide containers on parts of our sites where we've never had it. So, you know, I think some of our sites are really rural, so to find sort of piles of nitrous oxide containers on those sites has been really quite interesting. Catering was also a challenge. At most of our country parks, we have catering offer, all now actually. So we couldn't use our normal crockery. We had to move to disposables, which, you know, increased the site waste, but also flagged a couple of really strong opportunities. One of those is that although we've got our straws and our cups recyclable, our lids weren't. You know, so we've managed to find a lid supplier now, which can do cardboard lids. And we're also looking at how we can compost our waste from our cafes, linked to our animal waste and our food waste, which we have from our farms, our two public farms, and our catering concessions. So there has been a real opportunity for innovation through this, which we've looked for. Equally, some of the other challenges, as bins have filled and been over capacity and not emptied as frequently as needed, there's been overspill. Now, quite a lot of that is left, but some of that is from really committed people who want to put their waste in a bin. And what they've done is they've used the only bins which are available, which might be our recycling bins or might be our dog waste bins, which has meant that they filled up. But more than that, it's about the contamination. And I think, you know, there was something in the chat about contamination a little while ago. But, you know, the moment that dog waste or nappies go into a recycling bin, we can't use that. It doesn't work. It has to be discarded and put into normal waste. So it's really how we keep on top of the litter, whilst encouraging people to only put certain things in certain types of bins. A lot of that is linked to your provider, obviously. Our smaller sites, that was our largest challenge. We've got something like 80 smaller sites across the county, and we've seen a rapid increase in the number of people going to those sites and the amount of waste on those sites. Most of those sites have no litter bins, and our management of those sites in many ways is purely a safety inspection once a week outside programmed activities on those sites. So our management of that, of the pressures on those sites changed significantly during COVID. And if visitors are going to continue visiting those sites more regularly, we again need to adapt our management of those sites. It's gone from, you know, a volunteer maybe doing a litter pick through the site, and they do their normal tasks, they do their normal bird watching, they do their normal walk around, and they pick up the litter as they go. So essentially half-day litter picks every time they go. And in truth, and I know I accept the point about volunteers increasing, but they get really frustrated if actually what they want to do is help manage that site, help do the conservation work, and what they're actually doing is litter picking. That's really not why they volunteered to start off with. And we are really worried about the satisfaction that our volunteers, our traditional volunteers who are committed, might get from litter picking. And we're hoping it's going to die down. Equally, we're looking at how we manage that. So my last slide's around dog fouling. Hasn't really been talked about as yet. COVID puppies. We've seen a massive increase in dog ownership. We believe it's something like 3.2 million new pets have been procured during COVID. That means that the UK has 12 million dog owners. We know that our parks and our access networks, the predominant use of that is by people walking dogs. So certainly in our part of the country. So we have to manage our sites for those people. At the moment, we have still a combination of traditional dog bins, as the one in the image there, and also standard bins, which you can put dog waste into. That in turn means that waste can't be filtered, but it does mean that it's collected by our provider. It's a bit of a challenge. We'd like to do more with general waste and have that filtered, but we're not there with our current provider as yet. But as you'll see from the image, there's also bottles, there's general waste in that dog bin as well. So we'd like to get rid of all of those red dog bins and move to combined use bins right the way across. In Hampshire, we have launched an initiative called Countryside Canines, which we are working with other authorities in adopting. And over this last couple of months, we just recruited a dog initiatives officer who's primarily employed through the Bird Aware Solent scheme, who will be looking at dog waste and dog disturbance in those environments, but also providing support to the service. So we're trying to invest in those in that user group, but it is a real challenge going forward because there are considerably more dog owners using our park and accessing it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That was super. There's lots of rich discussion happening in the chat pane around disposable queues. So if you've also got maybe questions for Jonathan, maybe post them there as well. And Jonathan, you can hop over to the chat pane to answer those. I'm going to quickly move now to Sue, just because time is moving on. Sue is from Love Your Forest and Forestry England. She is the National Lottery Heritage Fund Programme Manager.
Thanks. So these are my slides. So I am Sue Middleton, Foresters Forest Programme Manager and employed by Forestry England. Next slide, please. Foresters Forest is a £2.5 million National Lottery Heritage Fund Landscape Partnership Programme led by Forestry England. So that means it's a partnership of 32 partners and 38 projects and we are raising awareness of our natural, built and cultural heritage here in the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. Love Your Forest is one of those projects with its own partnership, so that includes Hubbub, Forest of Dean District Council, Forestry England, Foresters Forest, Suntory Beverage and Food, and Forest of Dean Rye Valley Tourism. And the key message of Love Your Forest really is to keep the Forest of Dean clean, take your litter home and use the bins and recycling facilities provided. So this is a picture of one of our recent volunteer litter picks when we were operating to the rule of 6. So that's 5 volunteers and me out clearing up a part of our forest. Next slide, please. So before we have a volunteer litter pick, there's the sort of behind the scenes paperwork to be done. So we have a volunteer recruitment and registration process. We have a risk assessment, which is now even more detailed because it talks about all the COVID-19 issues as well as the actual hazards of the rubbish itself. We have an emergency plan in case there are any accidents. We have a map, and now we're recording test and trace contact details for anybody that comes along. Next slide, please. So the equipment that we provide is all the sort of normal things with litter picks. After we've collected lots of bags, we're working with our colleagues in Forestry England to take the bags away to a skip generally. But if there are things that can be recycled, like big things like wheels or bits of metal or bits of wood, then we are recycling those. I don't actually know how much Forestry England costs on removing rubbish from the forest, but I do know that within the Forestry District Council, they remove 250 tonnes of rubbish every year, and that costs taxpayers about £450,000. Sorry, £457,000. Next slide, please. So these days, when we're doing a community engagement litter pick, we tend to put up these posters on the site. So with a recent local litter pick, we had 12 volunteers picking up 24 bags. So we only put up these signs sort of temporarily for a week or so, just to remind people that it is local people who are clearing the area. So we don't leave them up for very long because we don't want to create litter ourselves. It's nice to know actually that as well as our sort of organised litter pick, there are spontaneous litter picks now happening by many others. There's a group called Forest Wombles. And recently, when my husband and I went out to clear somewhere, we found it had already been cleaned by a couple of mountain bikers. Those particular mountain bikers were doing it because they said they felt that mountain bikers had a bad name and they wanted to redress the balance a bit and clear up some of our forest themselves, which was great news. Next slide, please. This is one of the latest initiatives from the Love Your Forest team. So these are recycle reward machines. So there's 2 of these. And basically you feed them a plastic bottle or a can and you get a ticket out. Once you've accumulated a few of the tickets, you can trade them in to get a prize of some sort, which is about a Love Your Forest bag or wind-up battery or drinking bottle or a forest lottery ticket potentially. So those are going down well. Next slide, please. And of course, we want to get people young. It's nice to see youngsters actively involved in litter picks. So these are our child-size high-vis vests with dinosaur litter pickers. These particular children were working towards their Beavers Love Your Forest badges. So we have a number of different badges for scouts, guides, and everybody to encourage them to take part. When we tend to post things on social media, they tend to get an awful lot of likes and thank yous because we really do love our forest and hate the litter. So if we move on to the next slide now. So I'm about to show you the Hubbub video. So Hubbub created this video for schools during lockdowns in 2020, and it was an attempt to get the messages across even when school visits weren't possible. So it explains the various elements of the Love Your Forest campaign because it's evolved over the years. There is also a Hubbub Love Your Forest impact report and a Hubbub Love Your Forest inspiration guide. So if you like some of the ideas that you're going to see in the video, there are sort of hints, helpful hints about how to use these ideas elsewhere. So thank you. Now we're going to watch the video.
Welcome to the wonderful Forest of Dean. I'm here in Sudeley Woods today and I'd like to talk to you about our campaign Love Your Forest. It's a campaign to reduce litter and boost recycling in the Forest of Dean. Over the years we've been really busy. You might have seen the trash converter, a small converted horse box which swaps litter for treats. Perhaps you've got one of our car stickers. You may have seen some of our exciting artworks around the forest.
Oh.
Or perhaps you've even participated in one of the art workshops yourself. Litter, as I think you know, is harmful to the environment. It takes years to break down, it's dangerous for wildlife, and it's really horrible to look at.
Did you know 250 tonnes of rubbish is cleared from the Forest of Dean every year? Costs the council £450,000 to clear it up.
So the trick to avoiding litter is to encourage people to love and respect the forest. Also by cutting down on the things we buy that turn into litter, even accidentally. Here's Taryn's top tips.
Use reusable containers. Get a reusable cup. Making your own lunch instead of buying it from the shop. Try not to use tin foil or cling film.
So now we know how to reduce litter in the forest, it's time to take things to the next level. You see, lots of our food and drink packaging is made of really valuable materials, so it's really important that we recycle them as much as possible. So that's why Love Your Forest have installed these recycling bins in Lydney, Colford, Cinderford and Newen. We've also refreshed some of our recycling messages at some of the forestry visitor centres. Have you used the recycling bins? Plastic bottles in here, cans in here. Also, the sculpture known as the Myrrh Tree is new in town. The rings in the sculpture represent the rings of a tree. In the middle here, we have litter that would take a year to decompose. And then to the outer ring, with litter that takes up to 450 years, or perhaps will never decompose.
It takes 200 years for a can to break down when it's left in the wild. And it takes 450 years for plastic bottles.
That's why it's really important to recycle materials so that we can use them again and again, rather than using more energy and more resources making new ones. So what happens next when we put our cans and bottles into these recycling bins? When you recycle your cans and plastic bottles in the Love Your Forest bins, they all get collected up and taken away in a truck. When they arrive at our local recycling centre, they get tipped into a big pile, and then someone like Craig here takes over.
It all gets loaded onto a big conveyor belt. Eventually then, as it goes up the conveyor belt, there's like a big magnet in the roof, and it'll come down, it'll separate the tins from the plastic will go into one bin, tins will go into another, and then they all get recycled ready for reuse.
Amazing! So today we've learned why it's important to keep litter out of the forest and how we can reduce the amount of litter in the forest. The Forest of Dean is a magical and special place. Let's all work together to keep it that way. So look out for Love Your Forest activities happening near you. Here at Hubbub we love a challenge, and today our challenge to you is to find someone to talk to about litter and recycling and why it's so important to keep the Forest of Dean clean.
Thanks to Sue for that presentation and for the video from Love Your Forest. It's great to see all the initiatives that are taking place in the Forest of Dean. Again, if you've got questions for Sue, do pop them into the chat pane. I'm going to pass over now to our final speaker, which is Helen Lawless. Helen works for Mountaineering Ireland, and this year they have launched a very simple intervention, and Helen is going to share that.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and good afternoon, everyone. It's now afternoon. What I want to share with you today is it's a new initiative we've started. It's really simple, and yeah, it's about people taking personal responsibility. Just to tell you a little bit about Mountaineering Ireland, first of all, we're the national governing body for hill walking and climbing on the island of Ireland. We have almost 14,000 members, and the majority of those are affiliated to Mountaineering Ireland through one of our 190 clubs. And that photograph there I took a couple of weeks ago, and it shows some of our members on their first walk together post-COVID, very, very wet and very, very happy. There is a really strong ethos within hill walking and climbing of people not leaving stuff behind them. But more than that, a lot of our clubs also do an annual litter pick as part of National Spring Clean or just independent of that. And that activity is covered under Mountaineering Ireland's insurance. It's actively encouraged by us, and we actually provide a list of tips to clubs on conducting club litter picks. There can, of course, be, particularly with COVID, and that photograph was taken pre-COVID, there can be some reticence about picking up litter, but we're trying to challenge that with One from the Hills, our new litter campaign, and it's a challenge to all hill walkers, climbers, and indeed to everyone to pick up one item each time we're in the outdoors, to take it home and recycle it or dispose of it properly. And you can see that in the logo there on the right with the recycling symbol as well. Speaking to that reluctance about well, I suppose fear of COVID being on surfaces, we are advising people to keep themselves safe by using gloves or carrying a small bag with them and putting their hand inside the bag to pick up the item so they don't actually touch it. And of course, people are carrying hand sanitizer now as well, so that does help keep us safe. Why one item? Because it's easy. Who can argue that they couldn't pick up one item of litter? And we've had a really good response to this. We are also encouraging people to think of it not as picking up somebody else's rubbish, but you're taking action to protect the beauty of a place that you love. And again, we're seeking with the one item piece to get lots of people picking up one item rather than a few individuals picking up lots, because our aim is to increase people's awareness of their own litter and the litter that's already in the places where they're recreating. As our hashtag, One from the Hills, I do want to acknowledge Brendan Roach as well. Brendan is a member of Mountaineering Ireland who came to us with this idea just at the right time when we were thinking about doing something on litter. And it shows the power that one individual can have as well. And yes, it is as simple as this, just picking up a can or a banana peel. It's worth reading the message on that can as well. We've had lots of sharing of this message. Clubs have shared it on their newsletters. It's been shared through social media. It's just been such a positive response to it. People like the simplicity of the idea. This was also taken pre-COVID, but it's a Mountaineering Ireland member called Katie Mann. We were out on the hills a couple of years ago. Katie spotted this tracksuit top, and she had a bag with her for putting rubbish into, popped it in, and not only did she take it home, she actually washed it and sent it to the charity shop. So, you know, even better than recycling is reuse. We're thankful, obviously, to all the people who've shared our messages. We haven't got great take up on the hashtag, but we can see that the message is being shared widely. And want to acknowledge Walk NI, who've shared it on their website, but also to mention this one in particular. We were delighted to be contacted by a journalist from Agriland, the farmers website, who had seen the campaign mentioned on social media and was interested in learning more about it. And I guess it's been one of the things in our mind as we set up the campaign that there's a tough summer ahead for landowners and people in rural communities, and one of the reasons we're doing One from the Hills is to, I suppose, be pickers, not droppers, and to empathise with the people who are experiencing the downside of human behaviour right now. We're considering doing some paid social media advertising to push this message out wider, and also looking at partnering with an outdoor retailer in Ireland. This one, if any of you partake of an occasional pot noodle, you may recognise that that's not the current pot noodle packaging. When I picked it up a few weeks back, I thought I had actually found a leftover of somebody's camping rubbish from last summer. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll see the best before date. So that packaging, which looks pretty much good as new, has been out in the outdoors for at least 17 years. And we know from the previous speaker that plastic has a long lifespan. There's no litter collection in the mountains, nor would we want to see bin infrastructure up there. It's up to us as the people enjoying those places to take responsibility for keeping them the way we want to find them. And yeah, picking up rubbish is addictive. And I think this one, there's a question there about a correlation between product choice and behaviour. Be interested to know if anybody has an answer to that. But thank you very much for your time, and please help share one from the hills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. So that brings us to the end of our speakers' contributions. So thank you to all of them for contributing today. Lots of rich insights, and it just shows the wide variety of initiatives. Some simple, some more complex, some more traditional, others using technology and new innovation.